So you're building with DynamoDB, you know its power, but you also know that your app's performance and your cloud bill are tied directly to two things, reads and writes. Get them wrong, and things can get slow and expensive, fast. But get them right, that's a superpower. And in this explainer, we're going to give you that superpower. I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? DynamoDB is an incredible tool, but if you're not paying attention, its power can come straight out of your wallet. So over the next few minutes, we're going to break down exactly how you can take control of your costs and really master your data flow. Here's the game plan. We'll start with why reads and writes are the absolute foundation of everything. Then we'll dive into a critical choice you have to make, data consistency. After that, we get into the nitty-gritty, the math behind both read and write costs. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the key rules to make your app smarter, cheaper, and faster. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, why reads and writes matter. It might sound a little basic, but honestly, these two operations are the bedrock of your entire app. They directly control the speed your users feel, and you guessed it, the money you spend. Just think about it for a second. Every single interaction with your database, fetching a user profile, updating an order status, deleting a comment, it all just boils down to a read or a write. And each one of those operations consumes a specific amount of throughput, which is exactly where those costs start to add up. Okay, let's jump into Section 2. This is probably the first big decision you'll face when you're fetching data. And it all comes down to one simple question. How up to the millisecond does your data really need to be? You see, by default, DynamoDB kind of tries to save you money. It uses what's called eventually consistent reads. This just means that when you ask for data, you might not see a write that happened, a fraction of a second ago. Now, the data is almost always there within a second, but it's not a hard guarantee. And the payoff for this tiny, tiny potential delay? It's half the price. Yeah, 50% off. Now, the other option is the strongly consistent read. You have to specifically ask for this one, and it gives you a rock-solid guarantee. You will always see the absolute most up-to-date version of the data. The trade-off is just as simple. That guarantee is gonna cost you double. So let's put these two head-to-head. Eventually consistent, that's your default. It's half the price, and it works everywhere. On your main tables, your local indexes, your global indexes, the whole shebang. Strongly consistent, that's the premium opt-in choice. Full price for that guarantee of instant data. But, and this is a big but, notice that key limitation. It's not supported on global secondary indexes, or GSIs. That is a huge detail to remember when you're designing your app. So, how does this choice actually hit your wallet? Well, that brings us to Section 3, where we're going to look at the actual currency of reads, the read capacity unit, or what we call an RCU. If you remember just one number from this whole thing about read costs, please make it this one, 4 kilobytes. All of the cost calculations for reads in DynamoDB are based on chunks of 4 kilobytes. It is the fundamental building block. And here is the rule that trips up so many people. DynamoDB always rounds your item size up to the next 4 KB multiple. So whether your item is tiny, like just 1 KB, or it's almost at the limit, say 3.9 KB, reading it costs the exact same as reading a full 4 KB item. Okay, now we can connect the dots. This table shows you exactly what you pay for each 4 KB chunk of data you read. For an eventually consistent read, it's just half an RCU. For a strongly consistent read, it's 1 full RCU. And for a transactional read, for those all or nothing operations, it's 2 RCUs. You can literally see your choice of consistency doubling your cost right there on the screen. Here is a super important warning, a pro tip, if you will. Reading something that isn't there is not free. You might think, well, if the item doesn't exist, it should cost me nothing, right? Wrong. DynamoDB still has to do the work to figure out it isn't there, and you still pay for it. A strongly consistent read for an item that doesn't exist, for example, will still cost you 1 full RCU. And speaking of traps, be really careful with batch operations. For batch get item, DynamoDB doesn't just add up the total size of all the items and then round up once. No. It rounds each individual item's size up to the next 4 KB multiple first, and then it adds those rounded values together. This can end up costing you way more than you might expect. All right, that's reads covered. Let's flip the script and talk about Section 4, counting your write costs. The currency here is the write capacity unit, or WCU. And the logic is pretty similar, but with a few very important differences. So for writes, the magic number changes. Forget 4 KB, now we're talking 1 kilobyte. Every write operation is measured in chunks of 1 KB. And just like with reads, the item size is always rounded up. The pricing for writes is pretty straightforward. A standard write operation costs 1 WCU for every 1 KB chunk of your item. And a transactional write, again for that all-or-nothing safety net, is going to cost you 2 WCUs per 1 KB. Simple as that. Now, this next part is really, really important, especially when you're doing updates. When you use put item or update item, DynamoDB looks at the size of the item before the change and the size after the change. You get charged based on whichever of those two is bigger. So get this, even if you're making an item smaller, you're still paying based on its original larger size. Crazy, right? Okay, let's do a super quick rundown of the write cost rules. For put item and update item, you're charged on the bigger of the before and after sizes. For delete item, it's just the size of what you're removing. For batch write item, watch out for that rounding trap again. Each item is rounded up to the next 1 kilobyte before the total is calculated. And just like with reads, failed operations are not free. A conditional write that fails, it still costs you WCUs.
Okay, deep breath. We have gone through a lot. So let's boil all of this down into our final section, the key takeaways that are going to help you use DynamoDB in a way that is smarter, cheaper, and a whole lot faster.
Here they are, your 4 golden rules for DynamoDB. Rule number 1, always default to eventually consistent reads. That 50% discount is your biggest cost-saving lever. Rule 2, burn these rounding rules into your brain. Always up to the next 4 KB for reads and up to the next 1 KB for writes. Rule 3, be really wary of batch operations. Remember they round items individually before adding them up. And finally, Rule 4, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Failed or empty operations still cost you capacity. So, with all these rules in mind, the real question is, what are you going to do with this info? Take a look at your own applications. Are you using strongly consistent reads in places where an eventually consistent one would work just fine? Now that you know the rules of the game, you can start playing it a whole lot better.